This hangout is on air live. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the Audible, the footballguys.com podcast. It's Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, and Matt Waldman with a little pre-draft talk as we are 2 weeks away from tonight's Bloom and from our draft hangout, which I'll try to check in from Philadelphia.
Ooh. Yeah, it's going to be amazing. I'm going to be booking our guests here. We've got the draft world. I wish I had time. We would have to clone ourselves to have the ability to have all of the deserving people. But there's so much great insight out there, so many great minds, including our own. And what's beautiful is, as I had Dane Brugler, CBS Sports, one of the better draft minds out there, on the couch this week. There's really a lot of uncertainty this year going into the draft. And I think it's good because we can remember years where we probably could have said with certainty 6 or 7 or 8 out of the top 10 picks. And this year, I think we know the number 1 pick, unless Cleveland's it. And then, Albert Breer wrote today that the number 2, 3, 5, and 6 teams all want to trade down, which is a sign, unfortunately, that the value's down in the top 6 this year. But then it makes you wonder, number 4, Jacksonville, Tom Coughlin. Why does he not want to trade down? Who does he want? I think it rhymes with
Fournette.
Cornette, yeah. So,
Well, uncertainty in the draft, but one thing I'm certain of is that Matt Waldman kicks ass. Matt, can you feel the buzz 2 weeks away?
I'm telling you, I certainly do, and certainly emanating from all the silly season of the rumors coming up close. I'm also starting to feel the vapors coming out too. I'm getting a little inebriated from some of the vapors of what people are drinking. I sure hope that Mitch Trubisky does not go to Cleveland, but at the same time, it is always interesting to see how all this is going to play out and where these players go. And we'll look back on this, and I'm sure in 2 years we'll be talking about players taken in the 4th and 5th round who were far more valuable than the guys that everyone was worrying about in the top 10.
I love the draft redos. You get about 3 or 4 years away, whatever it is, like draft redo of the first round. Like, yeah, you can do it.
Otherwise known as dope.
I only knew then what I know now.
My dough mock draft. We begin tonight's show with some very, very sad news. The passing of Dan Rooney. Sigmund, you're a Western PA guy. I am a Steelers fan because I was poor in Colorado, basically. But ever since I was a kid, we wear our Steelers jerseys tonight in honor of Dan Rooney. The impact on the game, the impact with the Rooney Rule, the push for diversity from day one with Dan Rooney. I mean, so many things to admire about him as a businessman, but as a man and as a person. And we mourn his passing tonight.
Yeah, and really, if you're a fan of the NFL, and if you're watching this, obviously you are, mourn is a strong word, but we should all take a moment to consider the contributions of Dan Rooney. Fan or part of the Steelers nation or family, Western Pennsylvania, the Rooney family is royalty, and really a royalty in a true Western Pennsylvania way, because not royalty because they were above. Ryan Mundy tweeted out today, I thought it was crazy we had to pay $6 for lunch until I saw Dan Rooney pay $6 for lunch. And he was truly a blue-collar owner, which sounds like a contradiction in terms. Remember, Art Rooney bought the team. His dad bought the team with gambling winnings. So, and you're talking about an original owner. And he started out around the team, almost from the beginning. He himself was a quarterback, second team All-City, first team All-City that year, Johnny Unitas, who, when the Steelers released him, Dan Rooney told his dad that was a mistake. He took over the team in 1969. First move, hired Chuck Noll. As Chris Wessling put it, the Steelers were the worst organization in the league before Dan Rooney took over and the best after. Instrumental in the great draft of 1974, instrumental in building the dynasty. And then he becomes the great peacemaker of the NFL. He becomes, again, the Rooney Rule, dedicated to diversity. And look, as we've talked about before, the Rooney Rule was not something the league did out of largesse, out of generosity of spirit. The Rooney Rule was to address something real that was happening. And the fact that his name is on the rule showed his commitment. And I think this is somebody that when you think of the values of the Steelers, when I saw he passed, I posted a quote when he said, "Oh, if you have a down year, you don't get excited about it and make all these changes. That's just foolish." The way he ran the team, the Steelers having 3 coaches since the 60s, he saw the value of family, of continuity, of people looking out for each other. And they asked him what he learned from his dad. And he said that the way you treat people, that's what he learned from his dad. And all of the players, you saw Antonio Brown with a heartfelt tribute. Rick Gosselin, who's one of the great voices of the NFL world, had a tremendous tribute. I recommend everyone to read that. He got to sit down at the Steelers family dinner. Dan Rooney always made room for him. A human being that happened to be the owner of a team in a time when maybe we look at owners, 3 teams moved in the last 2 years. He voted against Art Modell moving, Matt. So, I think that we can say, if you love the NFL, a lot of the things that have helped keep it going have come from Dan Rooney and people like him. And hopefully there will be more owners or more strong voices around the league to carry on the values that he transmitted. And there's the Steelers as we know it start with Dan Rooney. So it's definitely impossible to overstate the stature of him in the Pittsburgh, Mount Rushmore. And then you also see stuff like him and Ike Taylor, doing the fist bump, and Dan Rooney, doing the scowl next to him. And you just saw he was really a man of the people, a man of the players, and there won't be another like him.
That is for sure. Matt, thoughts on the passing of Dan Rooney?
I don't think I could top that. I mean, I think that it was very well stated, and he was certainly an owner that commanded a lot of respect. He earned a lot of respect. And I think the best way that I could put it is just this: is that Chad Spann, now that he's not in the NFL anymore, and he's working and training with people. I remember when he and I were keeping in touch during his rookie year. And he mentioned to me, he played with Peyton Manning. He practiced with Peyton Manning and worked with him when he was first with the Colts, and then he moved on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And while he had good things to say about some of the aspects of that organization, he said that going to the Steelers was like night and day. He said it was everyone there from the top down. The players were interested in your development. They tried to help you with your development. Everything was very straightforward in the way that they did things. He said it felt like a professional organization in the highest order, and he loved his time there. And I think that that's a reflection of Dan Rooney.
It is the Audible Live, and we're going to get into some tight end news and tight end movement, perhaps, in this draft class, which certainly, in my opinion, is the best tight end class that I've ever seen. And a lot of people are saying that as well. We're going to jump into that. But first, Matt, back to you, because the Marshawn Lynch thing looks like it's going to happen, but it's going to happen via trade.
Yeah, well, that works out for Seattle. That's a very good thing that they were able to do that. And, as a Seattle fan, as someone who has really enjoyed watching them play, and because of Marshawn Lynch moving there was really what started my fandom of following the Seahawks, because I've been such a huge fan of his, as well as you guys have been. This is the one team that I'm like okay with the fact that he won't be playing with the Seattle Seahawks, because it is his hometown team. It's his opportunity to kind of finish his career with the team that he followed as a kid, and he's a different bird, and getting a chance to experience things along the way where he doesn't. It's not about the money for him. It's about really getting a chance to do something that was about his passion, and inspired his passion for the game. So I think it's great, but I also think it's nice that the Seahawks get something in return for it. So it kind of a win-win, if you ask me.
Bloom, 2 things.
Yeah.
Are they Super Bowl contender with Marshawn Lynch? And what kind of 3 things, actually. The kind of fantasy value that he'll have. And also, is this something that maybe we stumbled onto that other players might emulate, where you take a year off, you let your body heal up, and then you get back at it for like a year, because we're seeing more early retirements, and I think that's something. What's the after effect of, the player health issues? Guys are retiring at a younger age. They're not playing as long as they possibly can. Well, maybe for Lynch, taking a year off and coming back, we could see him be refreshed and rejuvenated.
Yeah, wouldn't you be refreshed if you were driving monster trucks and biking around Scotland and dodging buses and getting to take hot rods out and doing all the things Marshawn Lynch has gotten to do? And I think that one of the things we underestimate, and again, I have to say every year around this time of year, Matt's seminal piece, really, The Great Emotional Divide, I don't think anybody has given a treatment even close to that subject that Matt did. How long ago was it now, Matt? Like 5 or 6 years ago, you wrote that piece that basically the NFL is a mind, body, and soul commitment that even the players, maybe someone like Christian McCaffrey, who's been around the league his whole life, understands, but very few of the players understand the level of commitment it takes and what it takes from you. And it makes sense that, and what draws a lot of players to the game to begin with is love of the game. But what can restore that love of the game is a little time away from it and coming back to the game on your own terms. So I think you're right that there's 2 layers to this. One is taking that time away from the game to rejuvenate, but also what you see now is Marshawn Lynch coming back to the game on his terms in his hometown, and really in a storybook fashion, in the way that he gets, it's the Raiders' last 2 or 3 years in Oakland, and it's beautiful. I mean, if the Steelers don't win the Super Bowl this year, I sure hope it's the Raiders. I think Tony Romo is another example of a player who might be doing exactly this right now. And I think it's beautiful, the idea that a player would come back to the game out of love for the game. And I think that in general, that trend of players doing it on their own terms, and as opposed to, you've seen players that it almost feels like they can't leave the game, as far as the Raiders as a contender, absolutely, as long as Derek Carr stays healthy. And I do think there's a magical thinking element to this. Why not? Look, narrative matters, okay? The idea that Marshawn Lynch is coming home to play for his hometown Raiders in one of their last run as the Oakland Raiders at a time that they're peaking, it's beautiful. It's perfect. And even if Marshawn Lynch is 80% of Marshawn Lynch, which he kind of was anyway the last time we saw him, he can be as good as Latavius Murray was last year. And Latavius Murray's fantasy value was based on a lot of touchdowns. This is going to be a tremendous offense once again, and they have a tremendous offensive line, an interior offensive line that only Dallas and Cleveland now can match. I think Marshawn Lynch can absolutely be worth a 3rd or 4th round pick. I see him going in the 7th or 8th round now in MFL 10s. I think you're going to see that inch up now that we see Ian Rappaport's report that they're going to work out a trade. I think it's going to be one of the best stories of the year, one of the stories I'm most excited to see. And I mean, is there anybody else on this that we have given a nickname on this show in the NFL? I don't think so. I mean, there's only one, Dis My Son. And now we get to be his son again. We get to watch our daddy play on Sundays. How good is that?
Yeah, it's going to be fantastic and awesome. Just like our chat room react to me, and our man Jared, I think, started this, making your city's name or city's team as a verb.
Right.
So let's have some fun with that. So we'll read.
Oh, and I got to say this while Jared is on the line, right?
Okay. What's up, Jared?
And I don't want to do this because we're talking about Clevelanding things, right? But I've just got to say, Jared was Jared from Mentor when he won that contest, I think. Mitchell Trubisky's from Mentor, Ohio.
So are my aunt and uncle.
Well, let's start there, Matt. Again, it's interesting that we have 2 things going on, 2 reports or 2 rumors or 2 rumblings. And now, after pro days are done, I mean, if we didn't hear it before, I don't believe it. We've talked about it plenty, April being the month of liars. But there's actually 2 reports out there. One says Hugh Jackson wants Trubisky, but the front office wants Garrett. They're at odds. And the other one says that Hugh Jackson wants Garrett and the front office wants the quarterback, and they're at odds. So, okay. So all of a sudden Trubisky is now in that conversation. We've also heard Leonard Fournette at 1, which, we could see or whatever, but at least Fournette's going to be at 4. I don't think Jacksonville passes on him. Certainly Carolina would pounce on him all over at 8. See what I did there? But Matt, the Cleveland thing at 1, it's just got to be Myles Garrett.
Yeah, it absolutely has to be Myles Garrett. And if it isn't, then you understand, it's two things going on. One is the silly season of the whole rumors and things like that, things being leaked and maybe for a certain purpose, whatever that might be, maybe to create some uncertainty to see what kind of offers they might get for the number 1 spot. Or it is that what I've talked about in the past, which is the organization so dysfunctional that really talking about anything other than when are they going to turn this thing around and don't even say anything to the point of saying they're in the right direction until they actually make a playoff is really the right thing to do. So I think that, we may be in for, if we're in for a draft day shocker, then I'll let it be that, because I'm not going to anticipate that they're going to make as stupid of a decision as to pick someone like Mitch Trubisky, who has a possibility of becoming a decent starting quarterback in the NFL under the right conditions. But taking him first overall, you take a player first overall who's going to have a huge impact for you. And maybe, the Cleveland Browns, the last time they took a defensive end, it was a very good one by the name of Courtney Brown when they first started back here, but he couldn't stay healthy. So they need to, they need to stay true to. Hopefully their board isn't so whacked out that they don't have Myles, Garrett up there, because this is a slam dunk pick, if you ask me, in terms of what you're looking for out of a player. And I would be shocked if Trubisky ends up being drafted here.
This ties in with the Cleveland discussion, Bloom, but I was talking to Vance Joseph this week, and Dak Prescott was brought up during the press conference. And, well, quite frankly, Vance Joseph said what I've been saying or promoting as well. Like, hey, Dak Prescott went to a really good team. And I'm not taking anything away from Dak Prescott. Rewind this show and go back and listen a year ago, and me and Matt talking about Dak Prescott at the Senior Bowl. Like, so many things to like and love from Dak Prescott, but let's be honest, there were some simplified things that he did last year. He'll need to show more savvy and more nuance going forward, or NFL teams, well, guess what? They figure you out. That being said, I look at the Dak Prescott selection and the emergence as basically almost a 5-part process. And the 5 parts are left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, right tackle. That's the process. And this ties into Cleveland, Bloom, because Cleveland, and they're not giving up Joe Thomas. Right. I don't care if Peter Schaefer says, I've been trying to get him to Denver 3 years. It's not happening. So with everything they've done on their offensive line, yeah, they don't have a QB, and that's a huge question mark. But is Cleveland and Sashi Brown and everyone looking at things and saying, let's establish that core first?
Well, I do think that it makes sense. And unlike last year, when it seemed like no free agents wanted to stay, they got Joel Bitonio locked up. And of course, they got J.C. Treader, and they got Kevin Zeitler, who was arguably the prize, either he or Andrew Whitworth, sorry, Bengals fans, the prize of the offensive line class. Certainly Zeitler is a long-term signing. Whitworth this year, congratulations, Rams. So they have that interior 3. And again, only Oakland and Dallas can brag of an interior 3 that strong. Of course, Isaiah Crowell, who was Joe Mixon before Joe Mixon, and won't have the benefit of going in the second round like Mixon will. He's going to benefit from that. And I think that it leaves them in a place where whoever the quarterback is, even if it's Cody Kessler, again, I've said this so many times over the last month or so, maybe teams are understanding the Matt Waldman school of thought here at quarterback, which is don't force the pick. You don't have to force the pick. Just take good players. And this is they have the number 33 pick. So they may be able to get one of the 4 quarterbacks. They may be able to get a Mahomes or a Kaiser, depending on how the draft shakes out. Or they could certainly slightly overpay for one of the second-tier quarterbacks, Nathan Peterman or Davis Webb or wait until later in the draft, or maybe Chad Kelly, who we talked about on the film room this week. So I think building from the inside out is right. And I do think while the analytics are informing them, there still is something that analytics can never address, which is team building. So from that aspect, I like what they're doing. And I would say that, if they get Myles Garrett for their top 7, they let things fall to them at 12. They could get Corey Davis. I know that's a player they've been linked to a lot. They're going to get a good player at 12. Just get good players. Nobody's expecting Cleveland to make a leap to the playoffs this year. No one's probably expecting them to make a leap to 8-8 this year. They don't need to feel a sense of urgency about that quarterback. So I think that patience is what's called for here. And you'll know we'll be on the air next Thursday, 2 Thursdays from now, and we'll be able to gauge whether they are practicing patience.
Yeah, and we also will be able to gauge whether or not the rumbling about Denver and Cleveland swapping 33 and 20. So let's keep an eye on that.
Will the groundhog show his shit? See his shit.
Yeah.
But that also has to do with Christian McCaffrey. It always goes back to McCaffrey. But let's jump in. It is the Audible Live. The chat room is fired up. We appreciate all of you guys for watching and for participating in the live show. It is awesome to have the chat room, and we love the conversation that's going on within it. Matt, simply put, is this the best tight end class in NFL history or in the last decade, however long you want to say?
Last 30 years I've looked back at, I think it has, from a potential standpoint, if you're looking strictly on potential of this class, yes.
There you go.
Yeah.
Strictly on potential. Yes. And that's something, Bloom, that is pretty rare. I mean, when we look at tight ends, remember a few years ago when it's like, well, I like Clive Walford and I like Max Williams, and I think Blake Bell's got a little something if he develops, and none of them have done anything. I mean, at least Bell was like a converted quarterback, but Williams is disappointed. Walford's disappointed so much that the Raiders went out and got Jared Cook. So it's kind of cool, right, Bloom? Like
It's very cool.
We get to talk about tight ends, actually real tight ends.
We do, and I think what's especially exciting here is it's at a time whenever the position is a lot more important. I'm just scanning through this right now as we're talking about it. The last class, at least as far as having 8 or 9 in the top 100, was 2006. This will be some fun names. This is back at the time when we were just really getting deep into the draft. Vernon Davis, Martavis Lewis went in the first round. Joel Klopfenstein, Cecil.
Nice.
Anthony Fasano, Tony Scheffler, a lot of Denver connections here, all went in the second round. Leonard Pope and David Thomas from the national champion Longhorns, Dominique Byrd, and Owen Daniels. I thought Dominique Byrd was going to be a lot better in the pros. And Owen Daniels. So we had 10 in the top 100. I think we can get 10 in the top 100 this year. And this is a time when this position is going the opposite direction of running back. Jack Doyle, Deion Sims got paid more than any running back is going to get paid in free agency this year. And that's not to knock Doyle and Sims. They're solid players. They're solid starters. They're not plus starters. They're solid two-way players. The league wants tight ends. The league wants versatility. There was a really good piece written this week. I gotta look it up. I'm so tired of saying these things are written and I'm not giving credit to the people who are writing this stuff, about how basically these teams have 4 positions on defense and 3 positions on offense. To basically, Deontay Lee at DLBLAXX wrote a really nice piece on the idea that teams have 3 players on offense, because you got your quarterback, your 5 offensive linemen, and your 2 wide receivers that 7 of those players have to be on the line. You have 3 players to create an identity on offense. Traditionally, a fullback, a halfback, and a tight end. And now teams want to go with 2 tight ends or that move tight end. So the versatility that these players add to the offense, the ability to establish that identity, is increasing the value of this position. And it's happening, this influx is happening at a time when the league is really valuing the position. So I think it's exciting. And then it's exciting if your dynasty leagues or your redraft leagues are doing things to equalize positions and giving that tight end premium. That's exciting too, because we look at the rookie drafts as having a top 7, I would say, the 4 running backs and the 3 wide receivers, and then a drop off. But if you have tight end as a premium position with a 1.5 PPR, a boost for yardage, now you really get in some interesting decisions in the first round, especially when we see where these guys land. So, some of these guys are really, Evan Ingram's almost a pure receiving talent, although he's not a terrible blocker. Gerald Everett's an excellent receiver. There's a lot of Bucky Hodges is an oversized wide receiver. So there's a lot of exciting names here, some exciting fantasy talents. But then I want to just toss out there too, Kansas City, who has already signed 2 basketball players and turned them into tight ends. Demetrius Harris and Ross Travis. They just had 3 more basketball players in to work out. And the trick here, the hack that the Chiefs are doing, is they can sign these guys right now. They don't have to go through the draft. So we may be seeing even more basketball players. Rico Gathers, another one that Dallas is developing. Maybe they heir to Jason Witten. There's some buzz about him coming from Marcus Mosher. Always does good things about the draft, about the Cowboys, about the NFL. So I think that we're continuing to see this position, because it's one of those wild card positions on offense, will continue to grow to importance, and we have an incredible crop of players to fill it out.
It is a game of mismatches. And what's cool about being a tight end is that it's no longer just the pure receiving guys, like a Bucky Hodges, don't ask them to block, but it's also the all-around guys, because of the lack of offensive line talent that's in this league or coming into this league. An NFL coach told Daniel Jeremiah this is the worst offensive line class he's seen in 15 years. And that sounds about right. Decade plus. I mean, it's not a good offensive line class at all. So if you have a big-bodied blocking tight end or can get one, then that adds. And if he's a bit of a receiver, a Mike Roberts from Toledo, we'll talk about, Matt. But let's start with the other guys that we saw at the Senior Bowl. Mike Roberts was there, but let's talk about 2 of the other ones, Matt, and Evan Ingram and O.J. Howard. And Howard likely the best in this historic draft class. And Ingram was really pushing him, especially that first day. I came away from the first day of practice at the Senior Bowl saying, well, Evan Ingram showed better than Howard. When Howard caught up and kind of got what he was supposed to do in the drills, then that physical talent, I mean, just that size, 3 inches taller, 40 pounds heavier, whatever the number is, like that's when he showed what he could do. But my problem with Howard, Matt, always goes back to why didn't he do anything unless it was against Clemson?
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at O.J. Howard, the thing about him is going to really jump off the screen and get people excited, especially the fans of the team that draft him, is when they show the highlight of him taking the end around against Clemson and outrunning penetration into the backfield and the flat, turning the corner and going up the field. And you're going to say, wow, a guy with that kind of acceleration at speed at 255 pounds at 6'6" is just insane. And that's great. Certainly those are things those are tools to work with, on top of the fact that he blocks pretty well. I mean, you can see him use at the line of scrimmage in an extremely good way. As a run blocker, he's going to fit in there. But we need to remember something. Blocking at the college level and at the NFL level, way far apart. And, even a guy like Travis Kelce, who I thought was a pretty good blocker at Cincinnati, showed a lot of promise in that regard. Still needed a good year to at least get acclimated and become a better player. And they needed to bring Anthony Fasano in there to kind of help show him the ropes, and who was always a strong blocker. Howard, I think, is good in that respect. But what we don't know about him, like you said, is he a big play receiver? Because there's a difference between throwback plays where you're wide open and then you just run past everybody, or, leaping catches with nobody around you, and plays that Bucky Hodges made all the time, or even Evan Ingram made on a frequent basis, which was the big boy, tight coverage, I'm going to take a hard hit, or I'm going to be featured outside, beat press, and win on the fade route type of catches. They didn't use them that way, and there's 2 possible reasons why that happened. One is that they ran the ball a ton. They had Eddie Lacy, they had T.J. Yeldon, they had Derrick Henry, and who they have and Kenyon Drake, and who are they now. So use them as a blocker. That's fine. On top of that, they also had those outside receivers, like, oh, I don't know, that Amari Cooper guy, pretty good. And they didn't have a quarterback who threw the ball very well in the middle of the field. They didn't have those type of guys who really they throw outside, they run inside. They have their trick plays that go to the perimeter with some of their backs, and that's fine. But was the reason that happened was because maybe Howard wasn't a guy that they felt comfortable going to and trusting as a receiver in that respect to be that go-to guy? That's a legitimate question that some scouts may ask. Is he really that go-to guy as a receiver, or is he more of a good receiver, but not that guy that everyone expects? Kind of the way that Vernon Davis early on in his career, everyone expected him to be unbelievable. And I thought Vernon Davis showed a lot more as a receiver at Maryland than O.J. Howard did at Alabama.
Is he Jared Cook, Matt? That big athletic, like, oh my God, look at this guy. Wait, why isn't he doing anything?
Right. So we don't know if he's going to be a superstar receiver. We do know he could be a very good all-around tight end. And I think that that's why, from a football standpoint, he's more appealing. And there are less questions about him than there are as a fantasy guy. Then when we look at Evan Ingram, I would disagree. I think he's a horrible blocker. But I think, I disagree with my buddy Bloom on that end. I think he's serviceable, I guess, as an outside guy off the edge.
Better than Bucky Hodges. He's not a total loss.
Yeah, I would say this. I would take Bucky Hodges as a blocker over Ingram, because of the fact that even in those 14 frickin' snaps that Bucky Hodges had in line, I saw him do something where he wasn't late on the angle, too early on the angle, misdiagnosed the angle, and I think that people mistake getting in the way of somebody as a good block, and sometimes some of these places that score folks and say, oh, he's a really good pass protector, or oh, he's a really good this, and it's like, getting in the way or not showing good technique, but being able to prevent, but the sack didn't happen, or the guy was able to run through it.
He's rodeo clowning him. That's what he's doing. Like, over here.
Yeah. To me, that's like, he'll be serviceable on the backside as a wing back as long as he doesn't have to be the primary lead blocker right now. Maybe he'll develop, but I think Bucky Hodges has the build to do a little more. I think he showed in very limited fashion that there's potential for that to be the case. But when I look at a guy like Ingram, I think that sometimes people grade stuff in the context for those grades can be awful, because it's just like, oh, well, they didn't give up a sack on that play. Well, that's true, because he didn't give up a sack, but that doesn't mean that it's a good grade. It doesn't mean it's translatable to the NFL, and it doesn't mean if he drops his head and leads with his arms like this and closes his eyes that that's going to work for the NFL. It just happened to prevent a sack there. That's grading the result rather than the process. And I think that sometimes when we look at blocking stats, that can be a problem.
Matt Waldman, Matt, you got to check out the chat room. There's a great conversation going on about the items behind you.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
What is Matt doing with the empty bottles?
Bottles of water right now, fellas. Bottles of water.
Stay hydrated.
Yeah, there you go. Stay hydrated and talk NFL draft. Bloom, you're up with thoughts about Howard and Ingram. We'll get to Njoku next, but let's talk about those two.
Yeah, well, Howard, again, gives you that high floor prospect in the sense this is the kind of prospect that's easy to justify in the war room because he is going to be a plus contributor as a pass blocker. He's going to be, just on his pure athleticism and size, he's going to be a mismatch. He's going to be a tactical value no matter what mode your offense is in. Now, we might be looking at his ceiling from a production standpoint for fantasy and wondering how high it is. And really, that's going to depend as much on the quarterback and offense he lands in than whether there's something to this idea of why wasn't he utilized more in Alabama. But either way, I think you're going to see him go the top 12 at the very lowest. I do think it's interesting that sometimes when those January mock drafts come out, we see stuff that seemed out of whack. I think I had Dane Brugler on as my first draft episode back in early February. And I remember asking him, I'm seeing O.J. Howard number 20 in these mock drafts. That doesn't make any sense to me. He's a top 10 player, top 12 player. If Jacksonville, if there's a surprise, again, with Albert Breer saying that's leaving them out of the top 6 teams that want to trade down, they have their mind made up. If it's not Fournette, I think it'll be Howard. And if Howard is a pick really for anybody. Even, Carolina has Greg Olsen. Why not? Well, why not Howard for the Jets? They haven't made anything out of the tight end position for a while. But then where the rubber meets the road, where we care about for fantasy, he's not the number one fantasy tight end in this class. And I do think that's probably Evan Ingram, because he's not a tight end. He's a wide receiver. And that's probably why I was maybe a little too effusive about his blocking, because with the kind of player he is, like a Jordan Reed type of player, if he can do anything but be a liability, he's a better blocker than Gavin Escobar. Can we say that, Matt? Well, can we have a meeting of the minds there? I'm just saying, look, Evan Ingram, and especially because it's not just, and especially if we're doing, Matt's doing a terrific series right now, Football Guys, for those of you whose leagues have the guts to have rookie drafts before the NFL draft, which is a really cool idea. Evan Ingram's a terrific pick in the mid first round, late first round, not just because he's a pure receiving tight end, more of an oversized slot receiver, but think about the kind of team that would use a top 50 pick on a player like that. It's going to be a pass-centric team. It's going to be a team that wants to accentuate and maximize the advantage they have for having a good pass offense, a good quarterback. Chances are he's going to end up someplace like New Orleans. Or we remember what Dallas Clark did with Indianapolis, that kind of destination for him. So I think that, when we were watching Chad Kelly in the film room, and you saw Evan Ingram make some plays that show receiving ability, not just size and speed and measurables, but some talent, some ability at the end of those throws, in addition to just being able to outrun people or be bigger than them, or be just a tough matchup. So when we sort out this class, we can sort it out for the NFL draft, but when we sort it out for fantasy, I don't see how you have anyone but Evan Ingram number one.
Let's talk about Hurricanes tight end up next, Matt and David Njoku, who favors comparably to Greg Olsen. And a guy that, remember when Clive Walford came out, and I was excited about Clive Walford, but the one thing, and Russ Landy also would go on and on and on about this, as only Russ can, and he'd be like, the guy disappears, like he'll make a play and disappear for 3 quarters. Well, with Njoku, you've got consistency, size, strength, athleticism. Tell us your thoughts on David Njoku, Matt.
I think there's a very strong possibility that dynasty owners wish they picked Njoku over O.J. Howard 3 to 4 years from now, because of the fact that Njoku actually has shown the ability to make plays downfield in tight coverage in the middle of the field and make disciplined, good route choices. And his skill after the catch, he's not as fast, not as quick in terms of acceleration, but his ability to change direction is still very strong. He's physical. He makes the first man miss in tight areas of the field, and he's willing to throw his body around. He's a good runner in space and as well as in traffic. And I see him more as what people thought Ebron would be. Eric Ebron would be. I thought he's more of that down the line, because he can actually, I think he has more upside as a blocker. He's
not afraid of the physicality. And I'm not saying Ebron is, but you see a bit of softness with his game. Whereas with Njoku, he's like, bring it on.
Yeah. Njoku is a football player who happened to run track, as opposed to a track athlete who's trying football. And I think teams will be very happy with him, even though it may take him, it might take him a couple of years for him to come into his own, just like Travis Kelce needed a couple of years. But he's a guy you invest in because he has that high-end upside.
Bloom, David Njoku, your thoughts, fantasy owners, dynasty owners, how interested?
Yeah, well, okay, I'll give you a name, and this is almost sacrilege, because I think this is the player who had the best combine. Seriously, I don't think it's exaggerating to say the very best combine workout. Well, you guys could we do the guessing game here. I think it's Vernon Davis. Now,
Vernon Davis. Mm-hmm.
Vernon Davis. One thing in Njoku you can't match Davis at is that 4.38 40. However, Vernon Davis had a 42-inch vertical. Njoku had a 40-inch vertical. Vernon Davis had a 10-foot 8-inch broad jump. Njoku was 11 foot 1 inch. Vernon Davis had a 7 flat 3-cone. Njoku had a 6.97 3-cone. Njoku's 6'4", 246. Vernon Davis was 6'3", 254. And much like Vernon Davis, there are plays when you watch Njoku and you just say that's not fair when you see him after the catch. It just doesn't look fair to this other Division I scholarship athlete that is trying to tackle him. The stat that went around, I think, was PFF, who calculated this average 11.2 yards after the catch. Average. And I think that Matt's absolutely right, saying that, again, if we're talking about ceiling 3 or 4 years from now, Njoku, for the things that matter for fantasy football, higher. So you have these 3 players. Njoku, absolutely, while we're wearing our Steelers jersey, Cease, if he is still there. I don't think he will be. I think that Detroit at 21, speaking of Eric Ebron, the Giants at 23. I think these are both teams that are prime landing spots for him. And both teams that, again, if O.J. Howard goes to Buffalo and David Njoku goes to Detroit or the Giants, that's going to be easy when we're sorting this out after the draft. So Njoku is a wonder, and he's 20 years old. 20 years old. So projecting the player that he's going to be when he grows into his paws is kind of scary. And those are the kind of players I love to take in my rookie drafts.
Don't count out the Broncos at 20 either with Njoku. It's going to be interesting, going to be fun to see what happens with the talented Hurricanes tight end. Matt, where would Jake Butt be without the knee injury? Now he's saying he's going to be ready for training camp. I don't buy that. I think anyone that gets Jake Butt, you need to have the plan that he's going to begin his rookie season on the PUP list. I'm not against, based on his natural talent, taking him at the right spot and sitting on him for a year. Not rushing this back. I understand Adrian Peterson changed everything when it came to knee injuries, but Jake Butt's not Adrian Peterson, although very talented, and you could say potentially first-round player if he hadn't got the knee injury in the bowl game. So let's talk about Jake Butt and where he's at, the news about him wanting to be ready or thinking he'll be ready for training camp. I wouldn't see that. I don't predict that, but what do you predict about the future of Jake Butt, Matt?
I think of him as kind of like some of these Ohio State tight ends that have come out that everyone's kind of high on, that I haven't really seen much come out of him down the line. I mean, I think Jake Butt is a very capable player who could be on a roster, who can give you some skill as a blocker and a zone route runner who makes plays in the middle of the field. And I like that skill with him, but I didn't see really the one-on-one, stretch the field, terror after the catch kind of thing from him. Maybe I missed it, but what I saw from him was kind of more of a Jim Dre type of player. Maybe with upside, he could knock on the door of Heath Miller and ask if he could borrow the car for an afternoon, but not necessarily, but have to return it within like an hour by halftime, because I don't see him I don't see him as that dynamic of a player. And so, for me, he's a player that even if he was healthy, he'd probably be a top 10 tight end in my group, which again, based on previous years, might have meant that he was a third round pick in the NFL draft and a guy you look on as a future starter. I just don't see him as a game-changing player. I see him more as maybe he grows into a reliable starter and contributor, and if he can continue to work at his game, he might surprise the way Gary Barnidge surprised.
By the way, on yards after the catch per reception, I'm looking at the advanced data now. David Njoku had 11.16 yards after the catch per reception, which is well above the average of, it's almost double, 6.4 is the average for, this is for Power 5 players. And the next best guy, Scott Orndorff, 9.71 out of Pitt. Let's discuss Jake Butt and the value of drafting an injured player.
Yeah, well, I mean, you may get him in the third day where he's normally a second day quality tight end. But I think Matt really nailed it here. CJ Fedorowicz could be another name we could toss out there. I mean, just
scouts loved him too.
Yeah, a solid player. I mean, a really solid player. But again, at this point, we are tightening our lens for the things that stick out for fantasy football, and especially in this class. Again, even after we get to the top 3, there are lots of names that translate well as receiving tight ends. And some team could get a value with Jake Butt because of his injury, and he can probably translate to more help for NFL wins than fantasy football wins.
By the way, there's only 2 players that had better yards after the catch per reception when I go outside the Power 5. One is Nigel Kilby from EMU, who had 13 yards after the catch per reception.
Wow.
But Gerald Everett, Matt.
Yeah.
Gerald Everett had 11.38 yards after catch per reception. Let's talk about, cannot overlook the small school star.
Yeah, and Gerald Everett's a fun player to watch because after the catch, this dude, let me tell you something. He's a former wide receiver, but 2 things that he does that I love, and I love about any NFL prospect because, we're all old AFC Central guys here, which is physical play. Gerald Everett may not be able to block with the greatest technique, but he will come after you as a blocker. And I think that for his size, even at 239, he's still a pretty surprisingly good blocker. If Evan Ingram were the blocker that Everett were, he'd probably be my number 1 player on the tight end board. But Everett is a pretty good blocker, and man, does he make plays after the catch. He makes people miss. He runs through wraps. He bounces off hits. He does not like going down. And he's very smooth, being able to make the catches as well. I mean, he does a very good job over the shoulder. I think he's what hopefully Ladarius Green rounds into form, but I think he's what, if Ladarius Green doesn't round into form, what many people hope Ladarius Green would be. I think that's what Gerald Everett has upside to become. That's a pretty good thing. I mean, you're looking at someone who, when he displays that kind of all around physicality into the game, and you see evidence of some of the technique that you need to have as a blocker, that's a good sign. But I think teams will mostly look at him as kind of the way that, maybe the Chargers used Hunter Henry, which was kind of as a decoy type of blocker on the wing who could go out and win, in the intermediate and deep zones of the field as he develops a little bit more at the line of scrimmage. So I like him a lot. Very strong player, and maybe even in last year's class, he might have been a top 3 player.
Baby Gronk is something that's been tossed around with Travis Kelce. By the way, Vaughn, you probably shouldn't call him fake Gronk anymore. I'm just saying. Yeah. The new baby Gronk, who got big on Chipotle, is Adam Shaheen Bloom, 6'6", 280 from Ashland. And when you watch it, it's Division II football, and you're going, well, this guy is a man among boys. Wow. How's that translate to the NFL, and how excited are you to scoop up Adam Shaheen in your dynasty leagues?
Maybe not as excited as Everett, who I think that if it wasn't for guys like Njoku and Ingram and Howard, would stand out as the athletic specimen of the tight ends and the basketball background. And I also want to say a shout out to the defunct UAB football program that gave us Jordan Howard, now giving us Gerald Everett. And for these teams that we're talking about, Detroit and the Giants, if they don't go tight end in the first round, Everett could easily end up there. Or Shaheen. And Shaheen has got himself now well into the second day mix, size, and as Matt has detailed on the show, maybe not the most graceful athlete, but especially considering room for growth because he's a small school player. And you nailed it, Cease. Look, when we're watching small school players, what we want to see is, do they really stand out? And that's the first box we want to check to wonder whether they're going to translate. And yes, he does. So for all of these guys, I think we're going to have to sort them out by the quarterback and offense they land with. And either way, especially for those of you that do tight end premium leagues in Dynasty, this is a really important rookie draft to get right, because let me tell you, as Matt had in the RSP, if you're ranking the tight ends from the last 3 years, a lot of the top 10 or 15 are going to be from this year's class. Forget about that. Like I said on the couch a few weeks ago with Matt, if you just look at your dynasty tight end rookies are going to be 8 or 10 out of the top 20. And in your tight end premium leagues, especially where you can flex a tight end, you have a chance to put your opponents in a bad spot if you can get these 2 picks right, and probably a second and third round pick, not even a first and second round pick. So, we're 5-6 deep into this class, and yet we haven't talked about Bucky Hodges in depth yet. We haven't talked about Michael Roberts, who could be a very, very good receiving tight end. Maybe not as flashy as these guys, but so solid. We haven't talked about
Albert.
Yeah, I mean the hits just keep coming in this class, so it's really an important thing.
For Cornhusker.
Yeah.
And Lazy Leggett. We'll get to him a little bit later.
Yeah.
Who's lazier, him or Malik McDowell?
We call Gerald Everett Gerald Levert.
Nice.
Can we do that?
I like it.
He might be smooth like Levert.
Mm-hmm.
He's got the vert like a vert. I don't know what I'm saying. And I'm not even drinking. I'm drinking tea. Anyway. No cider like Bloom.
It's just water, I promise.
Austin East Ciders. Check it out.
There you go. See, now I got to go to Austin to get some cider. I got to go to Matt and continue this conversation about Adam Shaheen. And I remember a different time. We didn't have the resources online. I do not believe Danny Woodhead had a huddle, which is where, I'll watch guys and their coaches film. Obviously, Draft Breakdown, our friends at Draft Breakdown do a fantastic job, amazing job. But I remember getting a DVD of coaches film of Danny Woodhead from Chadron State and watching. It was 4 hours, no sound, Matt. I've told you the story before, probably driving to Mobile, but I was just enraptured, whatever, by this guy that was untouchable. I get that same feeling. And again, how do you properly gauge it? How do you, Matt, in putting together the rookie scouting portfolio, how do you properly gauge a Division II player that is so damn better than anyone else he's playing?
It's tough, but one of the things that you try to do is if you define the techniques that you're looking at for how a player should perform, in terms of, how they adjust to the ball. Do they use proper techniques, catching the ball, getting off the line of scrimmage, how they block? You can grade a lot of that within context, and it doesn't matter really the level of competition. It mitigates some of that competition factor somewhat. So you get a chance to be able to look beyond that whole questioning of whether or not he's going to be able to do it at the next level. Now, there are some things where that you're just going to have to wait and see. I mean, as a blocker, for instance, you look at him, and because he was 205 pounds when he entered school, because however he gained this weight, whether it was Chipotle and lifting weights or whatever he did, to be able to do that, it's like a guy with newfound strength. It's like, it's all, they're enamored with themselves, with the fact that, oh my God, I'm 277 and I'm still fast and I'm strong. Look at me, like bench press these blockers. Like he will lock out and do these things where he looks like he's just impressed with himself that he's able to do it, which I don't blame him. If I was 23 and went from 205 to 277 and I'm like, holy cow, I'm that strong. You might see some bad form as a blocker. You might see some instances where he's just like getting off on the fact that he can throw guys aside and he's not being efficient with what he does. But as a pass catcher, which is what's important in fantasy football, I think he's pretty graceful as a pass catcher, and that's what's important. He can make low and high catches. I thought he did it well against coverage. You can see him, the speed that he has once he gets up to speed, and he runs very well. I mean, the way Rob Gronkowski runs, you see some of that like big guy moving at a really good pace and nimble for what he does. He's not as reckless as Gronkowski is. I mean, Gronkowski's a guy that he'll lower and accelerate into contact and be able to do a lot of different things that Shaheen doesn't quite do. And then Shaheen has, as I've joked around here, he's got that cartoonish gait a little bit where he runs like he's like the Charles Atlas Beach body guy who's like, I'm coming to rescue you, who kicks sand in, my girlfriend's face type of thing. But, that's the thing. I would draft him in a fantasy league. I would feel very comfortable doing so in, third or fourth round. Maybe if I have to go a little earlier in a premium league, I might take my chances if the big 3 to 5 are off the board.
We're wrapping up the show, and there's still so many tight ends we're going to leave out there for now. We've got 2 weeks before the draft. Of course, Sigmund will be hosting our draft coverage. I'll see if I can pop in via Philadelphia and how that's going to work with the draft outside. Anyway, lots of things to get to. But as we wrap up tonight's show, our favorite guys we haven't talked about, super quick. I'm going to get the hotline bling out, and there just embarrass my kids again. I'm going to talk about Drake's tight end, Eric Salbert, and be like, yeah, Eric Salbert, Shrine Game. Nothing like a good Shrine Game tight end, right? Nate Sudfeld. He's a player that the first catch he made, first day of practice, he slid almost into my feet. And I was like, got to watch out for this guy. And man, did I watch out for him. That whole week of practice, making difficult catches, working the sidelines and squaring his body, all those those great things you love, the small things as a receiver. So for me, favorite guy we haven't talked about yet, Eric Salbert. Bloom, you're up.
Johnny Smith from Florida International. And again, just years of looking through the lens of what matters for fantasy. In most classes, he, like Everett, is the athletic wonder. The 38-inch vert, 10.7 broad jump, 4.18 short shuttle, and 6'3", 248. So he's not undersized. You may be undersized as an inline tight end, and has skills. So again, we're getting now well into the third day of the draft, probably, where a team that is looking for somebody to give them receiving punch from the tight end position, from a move tight end position, can get somebody with a lot of upside.
Matt, favorite tight end we haven't talked about?
That Nebraska Cornhusker, Cecil Carter. Cecil Carter was kind of a freakish athlete out of Louisiana who initially committed to LSU and ended up in I guess the passing game wasteland of Nebraska, where Tommy Armstrong was throwing him the football, and his zero line I often heard say is Cecil Carter is going to be like amazed that the ball's going to be where it's supposed to be when he runs a route. And route running for Cecil Carter is really his strength. He didn't test on the 20 or the three cone drill or the vertical, but if you watch his routes, the most important thing about running routes as a tight end, as an inline player, is being able to make that sudden stop, drop the weight, and turn on those stop routes under linebackers. And he does that better than any tight end in this class. I promise you that. And he makes a lot of good plays in tight coverage, and he can run after the catch. And at 241, he blocks like he's 250, 255. And he had to block a lot in Nebraska. But his catch rate is low. But when you look at the passes that he had to make a lot more difficult plays than most of the tight ends in this class, and he took a lot of punishment doing it. So this is a guy that I've rated very highly, and if I miss on some of these tight ends early, I'll be taking him in the mid to late rounds.
He is Matt Waldman, author of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. With 2 weeks left into the NFL draft, Matt, tell our listeners why they need the Rookie Scouting Portfolio. Also, what you'll get them post-draft as well.
That's right, because you're getting two publications in one here. This is one of the oldest draft guides that you're going to find, and it's one that is easy to navigate. Everything is bookmarked, so don't be afraid of the big number of the pages. This is a 395-page draft guide, and you're going to get 158 skill position prospects broken out in ways that is a unique process that I'll say this as modestly as possible. I've had scouts buy this book, tell me 3 or 4 years later that they've been subscribers since 2007, and that my process is ahead of the NFL's curve. That doesn't mean my scouting is. I make plenty of mistakes, and I'm not a trained scout. But certainly I'm doing something right to have that kind of an audience, as well as the audience of writers I have. And 10% of this goes towards Darkness to Light, which is a great charity that helps train people so that they can handle the impact of sexual abuse that happens to children, so that they can make sure that they can address that in the right way, as well as help prevent it. And you get this post-draft, which is like, I got fantasy owners at first that are like, look, I'd pay the $21.95 for it alone for this. And I said, I promise you, you will like the pre-draft just as much, if not more, 3 years later. And they come back and usually tell me, you were right. It's that thing helps me out in waiver wires and trades, whereas the post-draft helps me out early on within the first year or two.
It is the rookie scouting portfolio. Get it right now at mattwaldman.com. Sigmund Bloom, final thoughts. And that cider kicking in yet, buddy?
It's loosening my my cheeks. Maybe we'll continue this next week. The final thoughts are this is wonderful, and I think there's been a lot of amazing work put in by Matt and too many people to name building up to the draft. It's a huge release, and also the speculation. And again, why we love the draft so much. It's the ultimate cliffhanger, which in and of itself gives us so many cliffhangers for these players' career, for how they're going to affect their teams, how they're going to destinies will be changed, players' destinies, coaches' destinies, teams' destinies.
Don't do it, Cleveland.
Yeah,
don't do it.
Yeah, right. It's like the horror movie. There's your horror movie cliffhanger for Cleveland Browns fans. But no, even Cleveland fans, hope springs eternal, right? As baseball, except unless you're a Pirates fan. But hope springs eternal, and even Browns fans have something to look forward to this year.
Always got to mix in that baseball reference. He's Sigmund Bloom.
Yeah.
You follow him on Twitter at Sigmund Bloom. Matt Waldman is at Matt Waldman, and I'm at Cecil Lammey. This is at the Audible. We make it simple. Thank you all. It's awesome when I run into listeners. Happened twice today, getting recognized in public and people saying the Audible. I love the Audible. I love their RSP. Like, that is awesome. Thank you guys. It's awesome to create and be in this community with you. So thank you all for listening. As always, stay tuned and stay frosty.